All right. I just started the recording. So sorry for the technical glitch there, but we are recording this session tonight to share with folks that are not able to join with us live, and we'll share that link on a blog post and back to our website. But at any rate, as background for tonight's presentation, I think most of you saw the description on our website, but there has been a recent increase in immigrations and customs enforcement activity across the nation, as well as here in the Pacific Northwest. And as a volunteer-led, member-based organization, we felt it was important to share information with our leaders, as well as our members and staff, to inform them and equip them with the skills to understand how to deal with the possibly unlikely event of an ICE raid at a Mountaineers event or a facility. So that's really what the conversation tonight is going to center around. And we want to emphasize that our goal is that if there were to be an ICE raid at a Mountaineers event or a facility, that our response would be lawful, it would be respectful and professional, but it would be centered around protecting the well-being of the members of our community. And I think a lot of you know that community is one of our 5 core values, and we really hold that dear because we are a member-based organization, and we're all about providing people transformative experiences in the outdoors. And we try to get rid of barriers that would get in the way of their enjoyment of that. And we think that equipping our community, and especially our leaders, with the skills to deal with the possibility of an ICE visit as an important part of that in the current environment. So anyway, in that spirit, we want to ask that you all agree to the following ground rules. So one is be present, and if possible, if you could mute your devices, that would be really helpful. We have the ability to do that on our end as well, but it's just helpful if folks stay on mute if you're not asking a question. Secondly, is just to treat others with respect. This kind of goes without saying in the Mountaineers community, but verbal attacks, bullying, harassment of any sort won't be tolerated. And so let's just all treat one another the way that we would like to be treated. Assuming positive intent, whether that's in questions or comments, et cetera. And listening to understand and asking questions to clarify would be helpful as well. And then also just being mindful of airspace. We've got nearly 100 folks that are already logged on tonight. And so we're going to try to make time to answer everyone's questions. We may or may not get to everything, but if we don't get to things, feel free to reach out to me directly, and we'll certainly incorporate your questions into our response plan that we will make available publicly. Stay on topic, and then just giving others the opportunity to speak. So if everyone's good with that, those will be our ground rules for the evening. And then I'll just mention that we will have time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to enter any questions you might have into the chat box, and we'll try to work through those as best we can. And Becca and myself will try to facilitate that with our presenters tonight. And speaking of our presenters, we're really thrilled to have Amy Royalty and Abtin Bahadur with us from the law firm of Ryan, Swanson, and Cleveland. We work with on issues like this. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Amy and Robton to kick us off.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. We're really honored to be here and present with all of you amazing volunteers and staff and people affiliated with the Mountaineers. It's really a great organization, and we feel very fortunate to work with you all as a law firm and also as supporters. I feel very lucky to have an organization like this in our community. So today, the purpose of today's top presentation is really hopefully to help alleviate maybe some of the fears that you might have about immigration enforcement, but also importantly to make you feel informed and prepared, that you are ready, in case there is, hopefully what never happens, but an ICE raid at a Mountaineers facility or property or event. We want to make sure that you feel prepared for any of those types of situations. So my name is Amy Royalty. I'm an immigration attorney at Ryan Swanson, and Abtin Bahadur is my colleague. We're both in the immigration group at this firm. We have been practicing immigration for quite a few years. We're one of the oldest immigration law firms actually in the Pacific Northwest. So we've just been working on the Mountaineers kind of recently on this particular issue, but otherwise we do a lot more on the benefit side of immigration as well, helping people with green cards and citizenship and all aspects of immigration. So today's presentation is going to run about 45 minutes. We'll have Q&A at the end. But like Tom said, if you have questions or you're thinking about anything or a hot topic, feel free to post it in the chat. And hopefully we can try to address some of those throughout the presentation as well. We're going to tackle as many questions as we can because we know there's a lot of questions out there. We're going to be talking primarily about the constitutional rights and protections that you have in the event of an ICE enforcement action. You know, what are the types of enforcement actions that ICE or immigration and customs enforcement is involved in? And then if there is an ICE visit or raid, what are some guidelines? What are some things that you can do both to prepare for the raid, for the possible eventuality, as well as what to do during a raid, how to interact with ICE and what kinds of things to expect. We're also going to talk a little bit about your constitutional rights in your vehicle, as well as at an airport or border crossing, because I do know that sometimes you do have groups that travel, you know, maybe across to the Canadian border, as well as post-ICE visit protocols and other preemptive steps you can take to prepare for an ICE visit. So we can go to the next slide. I guess I was going to just do another introduction is, you know, you've heard a lot about ICE enforcement in the news, and there's no question there's been an increase in ICE visits and raids and enforcement, particularly in certain areas. You've probably heard about what's happened in LA and the deployment of National Guard, you know, which is definitely somewhat unusual. We have not had prior administrations that, you know, involve the military in this type of immigration enforcement in the United States. So it's all very new. It's new territory for employers, organizations, as well as individuals. And I think, you know, you have to remember that there is a certain amount of this that's PR, that's press, that's fear mongering, that's trying to create this environment of fear. And that the good news is, you know, the amount of arrests actually has not really increased that substantially during this administration. So while they might be putting on a big show, they're actually not necessarily arresting and deporting that many more individuals. That said, they did just pass a big budget bill, which you've all heard about, and there is a large, you know, amount of funding that's supposed to go toward ICE and immigration enforcement. So with that, it is possible we could see, you know, an increase in ICE enforcement activities. Certainly, you know, at employer work sites, but also throughout the state. So it is something that we want you to feel prepared for. So to get started, Apton's going to talk a little bit about the constitutional amendments that underlie your due process rights in the U.S.
Hi, everyone. So the main thing that we do want to get across to everyone today is that every person physically present inside the United States is covered under the U.S. Constitution. No matter their immigration status, the Constitution protects us all. Despite the headline, the constitutional protections remain unchanged, and we must all vigorously assert those rights. The two protections that we want to highlight today are the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. The emphasis on enforcement actions by the agency makes understanding these protections important. And even if you don't think you're ever going to interact with ICE, these same constitutional protections apply to any law enforcement or state actor who you're dealing with. So the Fourth Amendment, this protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Searches are physical trespasses on a person's house, person, and effects. This is an invasion of something in which you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. A seizure is a physical restraint, a demonstration of authority whereby a reasonable person would believe they are not free to leave. In general, the Fourth Amendment requires all state actors to have probable cause and obtain a warrant, a valid judicial warrant, to violate your Fourth Amendment protections. So, probable cause is something we're going to talk about a lot today, and it's probably best to define it upfront. Probable cause is defined as reasonable, trustworthy information sufficient to warrant a reasonable person to believe an offense was committed. If probable cause exists, then law enforcement, ICE, state actors can ask for a warrant from a judge in order to breach your Fourth Amendment protections. When the agents conduct operations without proper warrants or exceed their authority of the warrant, they have violated constitutional rights, and these actions can be challenged in court. Additionally, the Fifth Amendment, this provides people with due process rights. All individuals, regardless of immigration status, retain due process rights, and this is the things you hear about in every TV show. Right to remain silent, right to challenge right to have legal representation, to challenge detention, the right to have humane treatment, and protection against discrimination. These constitutional protections play out through asserting those rights. So the right to demand to see a judicial warrant, the right to remain silent and not incriminate yourself, the right to ask for legal representation before you do anything that could impact your rights further, the right to refuse an unauthorized search, and the right to document an enforcement action by a state actor. So those are the main constitutional framework that we have. Amy will now discuss the key agencies that will be a part of an ICE visit or an ICE raid.
And I see that question that I think is really helpful and interesting, Abtine, that someone, Amagda, asked, the Fourth Amendment, she's wondering if it only applies to citizens, and you had mentioned that applies to everyone.
Every human and maybe even some non-humans are covered under the Constitution. And so that is the big protection that we want to get across.
And as long as you're physically present in the US Constitution would protect those rights. Yes. We will talk a little bit about of sort of fluidity in due process rights at the border. So there is a difference between the border as well as physical presence or on US soil. And then there's also that within 100 miles of the border, which can kind of impact sometimes what kind of rights that you have, but you still have constitutional and due process rights. It's just that CBP or a border agency may have more of an ability to ask you more questions and ask for documentation if you're within that 100 miles of the border. So I think, does that answer your question, hopefully? And then we also have the question of the difference between a visit and a raid. That's a really good question. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. A raid is usually a larger ICE enforcement action, when there's multiple officers, sometimes even vehicles, helicopters, Humvees involved. But, often it involves, more than 10, 20 officers going to a work site or maybe even a public area and, sort of a larger enforcement or arrest of, what they perceive as undocumented workers or individuals. A visit can be like an ICE agent knocking on your front door. That might, or you get stopped, by like a single or a couple ICE officers at your facility. So, and then there's also audits, like an I-9 audit. That's also ICE that often conducts those audits. So that would be sort of an enforcement action that's like a raid or a visit, but on a smaller scale. So talk a little bit about the agencies. The main one we're talking about, you've heard a lot about, is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. It is very apropos for what they do. They have a bit of a chilling effect in our country for individuals, but they're the primary agency responsible for enforcing the immigration laws. So they handle both, like, maintain the detention centers, they handle the removal or deportation of individuals, as well as enforcing like I-9 requirements, so I-9 compliance by employers. So there's sort of both a compliance side as well as the arrest and detention and deportation side of what ICE does. There's also U.S. Customs and Border Protection. That's the agency that's at the airports and the border. They're responsible for facilitating international trade and travel, but also securing the nation's borders and ports of entry. CBP often cooperates with ICE, and they do have the authority to search and arrest at ports of entry and within 100 miles of the border. So that includes Seattle. USCIS stands for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're not as involved with immigration enforcement, but they do handle benefits application. So if someone's applying to be a US citizen or applying for a green card, this is the agency that handles that, as well as, issuing immigration regulations, I-9 compliance. And so USCIS, we've heard about, people going to their immigration interviews, let's say, and sometimes being arrested by ICE at a USCIS office, which is possible. So they do also coordinate with ICE. Homeland Security Investigations, this is the agency that also inspects employers' I-9 forms, and that likewise they coordinate with ICE in some cases. Other agencies that you might see coordinating with ICE is DEA, I think. I'm not sure of others, but there's, and in some states, local law enforcement and state governments or sheriffs. I know the Pierce County Sheriff I saw recently announced that he was going to be cooperating.
Well, he wanted to, but the Attorney General has pushed back on him and said, we are a sanctuary state. And the good thing about living in Washington State is our law enforcement is not permitted to assist ICE with these actions. The 10th Amendment, separation of powers between state and federal actors.
So Alton's going to talk a little bit about the types of ICE enforcement actions and where you may, potentially interact with ICE.
Yeah. So as Amy was saying, a visit, it typically comes up in the form of an I-9 notice of inspection. So ICE appears at a employer's office, issues a notice of inspection. The employer has 3 days in order to respond. Immediate action needs to be taken on the part of the employer to loop in legal counsel and prepare the response. But this is far different from a ICE raid where they appear unannounced and are there to basically effectuate mass arrests. To support a valid raid, ICE should have probable cause to believe that immigration violations are occurring wherever they're raiding. Now, if they have probable cause, going back to the Fourth Amendment, then they should arrive with a valid judicial warrant. If they don't have that valid judicial warrant, then we need to hold firm and say, no, you do not have a valid judicial warrant. You cannot come in. You cannot execute your raid. As explained later, the warrant requirement is crucial as the warrant allows them to access private areas of a home, of a facility, of your car. Other ways that you might interact with ICE or law enforcement for that matter, out in public, right? Just randomly walking down the street and you come across ICE at your home, right? ICE can come there. If a person goes to an immigration appointment for benefits or to check in, they might run into ICE. If your vehicle is pulled over, if you're at an immigration checkpoint, right? If you're especially in the southern states like Texas, Arizona, there are immigration checkpoints on the highway. And then while traveling. So in general, your constitutional rights remain unchanged no matter the scenario. We'll provide some specific guidance on each of these scenarios later, but the things to keep in mind, your privacy rights stay intact and your due process rights stay intact. So
a couple of questions I see here is how the military at JBLM is allowed to conduct surveillance of the civilian community and provide information to ICE. So I haven't heard of that happening, but certainly as a federal, government agency, the military would potentially have that authority.
So it would be, again, going back to that separation of powers aspect, state actors, so Washington state employees have different rules imposed upon them by the governor and our legislature than JBLM, military personnel.
And the question of that 100-mile border. So that really only is for CBP.
And yeah, we'll talk about that later. I think it's probably easier to just talk about that later.
And there are, Abtin's going to talk a little bit about the border as well as the checkpoints, because we have heard of that happening just in recent months. I mean, during this administration up on the way up to Canada, right?
Corridor. There technically are no checkpoints in Washington state because to kind of get into the weeds, our state Supreme Court has said that there is not individualized enough suspicion to pull over everyone for drunk driving or something along these lines, or immigration enforcement, and we need that individualized suspicion. At the checkpoints that occur, as Amy was talking about, at the border, those are not run by Washington State Patrol. Those are run by CBP only at their port of entry. And so if you're going to go through the port of entry, they say, yeah, well, you're in our territory now. We have jurisdiction over you.
And they seem to be, there was some searches that happened of cars on the way up into Canada. So it wasn't just happening upon entry, at the actual port of entry. It was on the US side is what we had heard.
Yeah,
but,
so.
So it's possible. It certainly was happening. And it was, I think, in the end, more for the purpose of looking for people, potentially undocumented individuals, than for, illicit items like drugs or something like that. So it's something to be aware of for sure. It has happened. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare for an ICE visit. And importantly, Abton mentioned that ICE doesn't always have the right to enter your facility. It's really important to demarcate whether it's a public or private area of the facility, whether or not ICE is able to enter the facility and either stop or arrest staff or visitors or, individuals, ask questions, take documents. It really depends on whether it's a public or private area. So we always recommend that designating the public and private areas is one of the first steps you can take. And this would be whether it's an office or, even in your home. If you have an ICE agent knock on your door, it's perfectly reasonable for you to speak to them through the door and not to open the door and ask, who is this? What agency are you with? Are you the police or are you with ICE? And making sure that you don't provide that consent, because as soon as you open the door and allow them in, then that you've given them consent to enter your private property. And so that, changes that expectation of privacy that you have in your private area. So other ways you can put signs up like employees only, private property, private area. These are all, no entry without authorization. And we've talked about with the Mountaineers, maybe having an invitation list and checking off people who are there. It's tough because you want to balance the desire to have these open events, which are very welcoming and allow anyone or the public to attend, while also making sure that you're protecting, the individuals who are in attendance from a possible, ICE visit. So in public areas, anyone, including the ICE agents, have the authority to enter that public area, and they don't need permission. They don't necessarily need that judicial warrant to enter the public area. So that would be like a lobby or a waiting area of a restaurant, or even in a doctor's office or hospital. Previously, hospitals, schools, and those types of sensitive areas like churches were considered areas that ICE would not, ever visit. And that changed. This administration, the Trump administration, has said that they are able to conduct enforcement actions in these sensitive areas. So it's possible. So in order to enter a private area of a business or a home or a facility, the ICE agents would need a judicial warrant. And there's, judicial warrant is very different from an administrative warrant. Most of the time, the ICE officers do not have a judicial warrant. It's very specific and it must be issued by a court, signed by a judge, and be date and time specific. So these are all things that you'd want to take a look at, or likely you would escalate through. You'd take a look at the response plan for the Mountaineers and likely escalate to the next individual, and they would give us a call and we'd take a look at the warrant to make sure that it is in fact a judicial warrant. But it's always helpful to ask, if you have an ICE agent who's at your facility or at your home, to say, do you have a judicial warrant to enter this property? Because most likely they might say, yeah, we have a warrant. Well, that might be just an administrative warrant, which is very different from a judicial warrant. Sometimes the administrative warrant is likely issued by an agency called Department of Homeland Security. That's the main agency that's in charge of ICE. It's sort of the overarching agency responsible for national security, immigration, as well as FEMA. It kind of like handles a lot of different areas in this country. And it is not issued by a judge or signed by a judge. Typically, it would list individuals who, the immigration office suspects is undocumented. So, and it would maybe list, state, we're looking for this specific individual. Can you please point, show us where they are? We understand that they're here on your property. We want to find them. And this warrant does not give the ICE officers a right to enter your private property. So you can absolutely refuse their entry, or what we usually recommend is you say, I'm not authorized to provide you consent to enter my property. Let me escalate this to my supervisor. Please let me take a copy of this warrant and I will, check with the individual or supervisor involved, and we'll check with our legal counsel, because at this point, I'm not authorized to allow you to enter this property. So that's the key. When you're reviewing a warrant, you want to see, is it signed by a judge? Is it issued by a court? Does it say U.S. District Court, or does it say Department of Homeland Security at the top of it? Does it list your company's correct name? Does it have the correct address? Is it time limited? If so, does it apply to the current time? And these are all things that you can take a look at, if either you or the responsible individual could review to make sure that it's a proper judicial warrant. So I think those are the important things to remember as ways that you can avoid giving consent. Keep your door closed or locked. It is totally acceptable to speak to an officer through a locked door, through a closed door. That's what has happened in a lot of these cases where they're going after, for instance, the international students. There have been some really good stories about how people were able to be protected from the ICE officers because they didn't open the door. They refused to give them consent to enter their property. And then, it's helpful to have use the signage to show which areas of the property are public and which ones are private.
Yeah. And then, so there's the question, what if ICE agents will not allow you to view a warrant or it disappeared? But basically, if they're not letting you see a warrant, then what they're trying to do is intimidate you. That's really it. If they're doing things by the book, if they're doing things properly, they either have probable cause and they have gotten a warrant, and so they're effectuating the warrant and can violate your privacy, can violate the private areas of your home, of your life, of your body, right? Or they don't have sufficient probable cause, and so they don't have the ability to violate your Fourth Amendment rights. If they have an administrative warrant, I think that was the second part of the question. Yeah, an administrative warrant. If you are not listed on that warrant, then it doesn't apply to you. It's a memo from an internal agency to another member of that internal agency. It has no impact on you. It does not give them the right to enter the private areas of your home. If they show you an administrative warrant, you can say, this is not sufficient. You should speak to my attorney. If they're trying to bluff you, you bluff them right back and say, you speak to my attorney because this is not valid. Building on,
and what if they don't refuse to, these masked men without the badges, and what if they refuse to show their badge or identify themselves as ICE officers?
And so we need to stay firm and say, no, you need to show me a badge. I don't know who you are. You are nobody until you prove to me that you are law enforcement. Even then, you have no right to detain me if you are not law enforcement. Even if you are law enforcement, you still don't have the authority to detain me because I have my constitutional rights. Am I free to leave? If so, walk away. If not, okay, why am I being detained? Force them to answer the questions. Take in information, do not provide information until they actually have shown you there's a reason why you need to be bothered by a law enforcement officer.
So I think Abton's going to talk a little more about what can happen during an ICE interaction, and I think we'll talk a little bit about what if you are in this public area, like someone mentioned what happened in MacArthur Park in LA, today, which I was just talking about with Tom and Abtine.
Yeah.
You know, it's scary. Again, it's that purpose of creating fear among, you know, this was in an immigrant community and that's what they're trying to do. But so what do you do in those situations when you're not necessarily in a private area?
Yeah. And so during an interaction with ICE, what can you do? Main thing I want everyone to do, stay calm, breathe, right? Box breathing, 2 seconds in, hold it, 3 seconds out, right? Slow down your heart rate. Nobody likes talking to law enforcement. Nobody likes talking to ICE, but maintaining a professional demeanor, as Tom was talking about at the outset, we want to ensure everyone remains composed and does not panic and escalate the situation. You know, these officers are often on edge, and it's unfortunately on us to control this situation, and panic will only escalate tensions and make the situation worse. So if you stay calm, you can help them stay calm. Train your colleagues, visitors, other people you know you're in charge of to remain calm as well. Remind them, do not run to the exits, do not try to escape. This will only make things worse because that running away could provide the probable cause they need to detain someone, right? If possible, do not allow the ICE officer, law enforcement officer to enter the private areas of your facility, of your car, of your home at all from the outset, right? If they have a warrant, that's great. They can slide it under the door, they can slide it through a window. There's no reason for us to open doors to law enforcement unless and until they have shown us that they have the right to violate our private areas. Take your time and start recording as soon as you can or feel comfortable doing so, right? The only reason we have a lot of the proof of what this government is doing, what law enforcement does, is because we're recording them. And so turn it on, record video, take your time. ICE will make you think that time is of the essence, right? But they are bound to follow the Constitution if they are legitimate state actors, right? And the Constitution is in place to protect us from them, right? The Second Amendment, everybody loves to get feisty about, right? It's there to protect us against the government. At least that's the argument. And so we want to ensure that state actors are following the rules. We want you to gather information and not provide information. Ask for their name, ask for their badge number, confirm their agency. If they say they're police, follow up, ask them, are you Pierce? Are you King County? Are you Washington State Patrol? Who are you with? And show me your badge. If they don't have a badge, if they're not willing to show you a badge, then pretend it's me showing up and asking you all these questions. And if I show up at your house and start asking you these questions, are you going to tell me your life story? No, you're not going to be intimidated by me, right? It's just a random stranger who's asking you things. They have no authority until they show you that badge. Okay? So, if they are law enforcement, ask them why they're there. Why are you here? Oh, you're effectuating a warrant? I'd love to see your warrant. Please show it to me. Thank you. I will show it to my attorney, and we will see if this is a valid judicial warrant. Again, through the mail slot, window, whatever it is. Train reception, security guards to tell ICE that, okay, we're going to look things over. You need to wait in another area while we look things over. And the response plan, right? Knowing who in the response plan we need to contact next. Is it a offsite manager? Is it general counsel? Who is it that is a designated person that could provide this law enforcement officer, this ICE agent, with the checkoff that says, yes, this is a valid judicial warrant and you may enter this private area of this facility? Because David Hearn, Larry Walker, Michael Arigaya, I don't know what your roles are, but I don't know if you have the authority to grant people entry to the private areas of various facilities, right? I doubt it. And so we want the people, we want you to pass the buck to somebody else and say, I don't have authority here. You need to wait for them to give us the sign off. And once they do, then we will allow you to enter this private area with your valid judicial warrant. Think about who else might need to be called. So attorneys, maybe civic leaders. Washington Immigration Solidarity Network, WISN, they have a ICE basically tracker that puts out alerts to vulnerable communities about ICE enforcement actions. And hey, this is going on in this area, so maybe we don't want to be in that area, right? They have a telephone number. It is 1-844-724-3737. And we can provide that with our guidance, and follow up to this so that everyone has this.
And we will, I know that Tom is still working on the response plan, so that will be shared with the Mountaineers community, and it will likely be completed soon.
Yeah.
In the next
we're working
month or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just working with them on that. And then someone asked about the question of, if they are masked and don't refuse to provide a badge, can you ask to unmask? I mean, you can't really force that.
Yeah, I mean, again, think of them, just
But you
picture
don't have to
my
let
face.
them in.
Picture my face, picture Amy's face. If she comes to you and is demanding things, that is all they are until they show you a valid badge and a valid judicial warrant to try to detain you, right? They're just another Joe Schmo until they've actually shown they have some sort of authority invested by the government. So other things to consider is notifying people around you, right? You can do this maybe covertly, maybe you want to do it publicly. You can assign people to notify others in the surrounding area and let them know, hey, there's just as you would if there was somebody acting wildly at reception or in an area, you would say, hey, stay away from this area for now until we resolve this situation, until we have it under control. Maybe everyone stays in a back part of this facility, in a private area, out of sight, and you don't get involved. Reviewing the warrant, as Amy said, confirming the scope of the warrant, where specifically are they allowed to enter, what are they allowed to seize? Is it a person? Is it property? What is it that they're looking for? Take a photo of the warrant, document everything, send it to your attorneys, send it to your managers. If they show you an administrative warrant, and this was one of the questions that was asked, that's not enough to search the private areas. You don't even have to say if the person listed on that administrative warrant is there. You don't have to take the ICE agent to the person on that administrative warrant. The administrative warrant only applies to that person and other members of ICE. That's it. You are not a member of ICE, and you're hopefully not listed on that administrative warrant. So that is not for you to act upon. And avoid inadvertently giving consent, right? We all want to be polite and give people a wave. Oh, come on in, follow me, hold doors open. If you see someone that looks like law enforcement, don't hold the door open, right? Maybe you want to close the door, maybe you want to lock it, and then figure out the rest later. There are some exceptions to the warrant requirement, right? And so they need probable cause to effectuate and obtain a warrant, and then to act on that warrant. Some of the main exceptions to the warrant requirement that give a person probable cause on the spot, and so there's not enough time to get the warrant, are the plain view doctrine. If an officer is in a public area already and they see something that gives them probable cause, right? So a list of something or illicit materials, drugs, who know what it could be, that's fair game, right? They've seen it. So we want you to keep people out of sight, keep documents out of sight. If there is sensitive documents that have people's names, birthplace, something like that, we don't want that just lying around. If you have a computer, lock it down so that it is not accessible to some, perusing eyes. The other main exception is hot pursuit. So this goes back to running, right? If they see someone running, they're going to say, we need to chase that guy. What is he up to? And if that person runs into a private area of a facility, all bets are off, and they have the right to chase that person, right? You don't get to call Ollie Ollie Oxenfree just because I ran into Larry Walker's home and I'm safe, right? The police are going to chase him into your house, unfortunately. So keep your doors locked, and hopefully they can't get in there. Closely regulated businesses, so preschools, things that we as a society have said we want to regulate, right? Those they can enter without a warrant because we said it is more important as a society that we're overseeing daycares and making sure nothing untoward is happening, restaurants, potentially, if there's health code violations, right? Things like that. ICE can try to say that on the spot, yeah, we had to act because if we didn't, if there was delay, the evidence was going to be lost. But courts are very limited in how much leeway they will give an officer for that excuse of it's going to be lost, it's going to be gone forever, because courts do want to hold on to power as well. They want state actors to act appropriately. And so if there is time to get a warrant, ICE must get a warrant. And so that is.
Yeah, well, I was thinking we might want to move on to public areas and driving, but quickly, maybe just a little bit on exercising your due process rights if there is an ICE interaction. Let's say I spoke with Becca about this. You're in a group, you're hosting some visitors or even children at a camp outing or something like that, and an ICE agent walks up to you and starts questioning. They question either you or a volunteer or visitor in your group without necessarily presenting proper authority or a warrant. It's important to ask if you're being detained. Ask for that warrant. Do you have a judicial warrant? I mean, you are in a public area, let's say. You may not be in a private facility, but it's still reasonable to ask for that warrant, the judicial warrant, for them to ask the questions. Exercise your right to speak with an attorney, your right to remain silent. In terms of, let's say it's a child involved, it's totally acceptable for you to notify the child of their rights, or their right to, if it's a minor and they're in your custody, then, you should remind any officer that they should go through you, that, that minor is in your custody and your care, and they should not be asking them questions without you present. So everyone has the right to remain silent, even if ICE has a warrant. So you can always remind your guests and visitors. I would recommend that you don't say, don't talk to them. It's better just to remind people of their rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to ask for an attorney. If a person does have valid immigration documents with them, then it's acceptable, then it's helpful to show them to the officer. That's, certainly doesn't hurt. But a lot of times people don't have documents, or they may be undocumented. So if that's the case, then they can decline the officer's request and exercise their right to remain silent. If you're at the border, it's a different calculus, right? Then you could potentially be arrested if you refuse to provide documents showing your, authorization to enter the United States or enter the country or work, your lawful status documentation in the US. Then it is possible you'll be arrested if you don't present those documents. So it's a different calculus, when you're within that at the port of entry or the US border crossing. So I think we talked about monitoring the search. I thought that was great. Someone posted phones up, cell phones up, record the interaction. It's so important. And, they might ask to grab your phone, or you can't record this. That is absolutely incorrect. You are totally authorized to record the interaction, whether or not you're involved or you're just a spectator. You can absolutely and should try, if you can, to record everything. If you're unable to do that with your phone, after the interaction, try to keep notes of exactly everything that happened. What kinds of questions were asked? What were they wearing? What did they say? Did the officer provide a name, their badge? Those types of questions. And then obviously escalate, right? We're going to have that response plan. You're going to have that list of people to call. Most likely attorneys will be involved. So, you will have help. You're not going to be out there on your own. And I realize sometimes people don't have access to, maybe you don't have cell service. What do you do in that situation? So, that those are going to be more tricky scenarios that maybe we can talk about as part of the response plan.
Mhm.
So Amjim's going to talk a little bit about other types of ICE interactions, like with a car, because I know people have a lot of questions about that, and at the border.
Yeah. And so I think there was one question, are we saying it's okay to deport people as long as their constitutional rights are observed? And on a tough level, yeah, that's basically all immigration attorneys want is these are the rules set up. Deportation is part of the immigration law. If a person is removable, then they can go through the process to be deported. And yeah, that's really what we're asking for is the Constitution applies to everyone. Let's make sure it applies to everyone.
They still have a right to fight their deportation. They should have a right to fight it in immigration court. That's, people are entitled to.
And you'd be surprised the amount of people who are U.S. citizens who are placed into deportation proceedings. And so, yeah, we want to give everyone their day in court. So other types of ICE interactions in public, right? Remember, it's just me, it's just Amy walking up to you and demanding to see things. So your constitutional rights still apply. You have the right to ask if you are under arrest. Am I being detained? These are the magic words. Am I being detained? If you are being detained, they should have reasonable suspicion. They should have specific facts justifying their suspicion that you are involved in an immigration offense or you're violating federal law. Just having a different color skin, just having an accent, this is not sufficient to detain someone, right? So if you see someone in a public place, remind them, hey, have you asked if you're being detained? Are you being detained? And ask, why am I being detained, right? Say, I refuse to answer any questions without an attorney present. I would like to speak to an attorney. Am I free to leave? Am I being detained? These are the questions that we need to keep asking them. Again, gathering information, not providing information. If you're not being detained, great. Walk away calmly, slowly. Do not run away, right? Again, never run. Walk away slowly because you are not being detained. You are free to leave. There's no reason why you need to be questioned. If you are being detained, if they do have some sort of reasonable objective, specific reason for detaining you, they can pat you down for officer safety, right? To make sure you don't have a weapon on you. But a search beyond that does require probable cause. It does require a reason for why they need to inspect that area. And even then, if you are wearing a backpack, if you have a Tupperware container, right? They need a warrant to search that Tupperware. They need a warrant to search your back, right? So do not consent to those searches. Do not open the backpack for them. Do not open the Tupperware. You are probably not required to show immigration documents, but this is the new registration requirements that they are rolling out. Say everyone needs to have registration requirements. So if you're a US citizen, we highly recommend that you get a real ID, right? It'll have the star on it and it shows you're a US citizen. Apply for the US passport card. It's something you can put in your wallet. It's only available to US citizens, right? If you have a US passport card, that means prima facie, you are a US citizen. If you're a permanent resident, a green card holder in the United States, you should have your green card with you at all times. It is a citable offense. Kelly Ryan's correcting me. It has a flag. I'm sorry. I thought it has a star. And so if you're a green card holder, you need to have your green card with you 24 hours a day at all times. Be able to produce it if you are asked. If you're another status in the United States, have evidence of your status. If a person is undocumented, well, then it might be best to not carry anything. It is better to show no documents, right? And just make it clear, I'd like to speak to an attorney. I do not want to answer any questions. I would like to speak to an attorney, and then they can produce documents with an attorney present at a later time as opposed to on the spot. I have a passport card, but it was issued 5 years ago. Is it going to meet the recent changes? It is fine. If it was issued by the federal government, that is sufficient. The car. I don't want to leave here without talking about the car. So if you are pulled over in Washington State, the driver must answer their name, provide provide your license, registration, and proof of insurance. If you are a passenger in the car, you do not have to answer any questions unless they have probable cause to think there is something, an immigration violation, some sort of criminality afoot, right? And so your car is a private area, right? You need probable cause to search that car. This is lessened by the plain view doctrine, right? And so if they're looking in the car and they see something on the passenger seat, Linda, I don't know what you're getting into in your free time, but hopefully it's nothing illicit. And so there's nothing illicit in your passenger seats. And so, there's nothing that would give them probable cause at the moment to say, no, you need to step out. And we need to detain you further and search your vehicle, right? The Supreme Court does require CBP to have reasonable suspicion that the driver or passenger in the car committed an immigration violation or a federal crime. So the most likely place where you'll see this is coming away from a port of entry, right? CBP might be chasing somebody and they'll say, no, you need to stop. We need to pull you over because we think you didn't pass through the port of entry correctly. And that in that case, yeah, they do have probable cause to search that person's car, to detain them and arrest them. Best practices: don't roll down your window any more than necessary to pass documents in and out. Make sure you know who you're talking to. Ask them who they are: law enforcement, CBP, ICE, etc. If needed, assert your right to remain silent. Do not answer questions about nationality or place of birth if it is not relevant to the conversation with the officer. You have a right as a driver to pull over in a place where you feel safe. Okay. And this is another main thing that I want to get across. If you do not feel safe pulling over at the side of the highway, maybe you drive all the way to a police station because that is an area you might feel safer in, right? We want you have the right to do that. You have to make it clear to the person following you that you are pulling over, right? You have your signal on, you're driving the speed limit, you're not speeding away, but you can take the law enforcement officer back to the police station if you need to, if that's where you're going to feel safe for them to effectuate this search of you. I know we're running short on time.
Yeah.
Tom, do you want me to keep going or you want?
Probably have a couple questions and then we might have to end it.
That sounds great, Amy. Yeah, thanks.
Good. Well, I think, yeah, there's a lot involved and we can't even really touch the surface of all of these issues and rights. Hopefully we've answered some of your questions. I see the question about, what do you do when the Constitution is being weakened, right? When they're not necessarily following the Constitution. We do feel, we are fortunate to live in a state like Washington where our rights are probably more protected than in other parts of the country, through our, Attorney General's office, some of our laws. Washington state law says that ICE needs to have reasonable suspicion, right, to stop you in your car.
And our Washington state constitutional rights are actually stronger than the US constitutions, right? So they have to go through more hoops in order to search. You have a bigger privacy interest in your life, papers, and effects in Washington state than in other states. So if some of you were here during the trash gate, right, where they wanted to search your recyclings to make sure you were doing it correctly, that was a constitutional issue, right? We have a privacy interest in our trash, and under the Washington state constitution, that's why that was found unconstitutional. I do want to address HS's question. Does an officer need to explicitly tell you what their probable cause is?
Mhm.
Yes. You
Yeah.
can't always ask, oh, why am I being detained? Why am I being detained? If anyone has ever seen the crazy libertarian videos where they just keep asking the officer, am I being detained? Why am I being detained? That's it. That's the underpinning for what they're doing. Is they are asking for the probable cause. Why am I being detained? I've done nothing wrong. You have no probable cause. You have no reasonable suspicion. You have no authority to keep me here. And like Mickey said, use your cell phone and record them. The one caveat I will say about the cell phone, and Amy mentioned it, is yeah, they might try to take it from you, right? They might try to confiscate it. And so knowing where your videos are being recorded, is it being uploaded to Google Photos, Apple iCloud, right? Is there an automatic backup being made where you could access it if your phone was confiscated?
And hopefully you'll feel prepared for if anything like this happens. As we've said, we haven't had the kind of ICE activity that they've had in other parts of the country like LA, but this could change. You know, there is going to be more funding. So we want you to feel ready, prepared, and
Michael, yeah, so a dual citizen, America, if you are a dual citizen, you are always a US citizen first, right? You're paying your taxes, you're filing your taxes in America first. They're getting their money first, so you are an American first. If you are a naturalized citizen, it might be worthwhile looking back at your immigration history, seeing if there's any arrests prior to your green card or whatever method you obtained your citizenship, and seeing if you're at risk there, because we are hearing they want to prioritize denaturalizations. And so saying you didn't deserve the green card at the outset, and so because of that, we're taking away your citizenship. Can CBP on your return to US do a full vehicle search and demand you step away into your office without probable cause? So border, your due process rights are at their absolute minimum due to national security.
That's at the airport as well.
That's at the airports as well. And so, yeah, if illegally purchase fruit, I would tell you, be careful about fruit at the border. It is just a headache waiting to happen. So buy Washington State fruit. Yeah, they can pull you in. It's more likely that Canadian border will pull you in, or actually you're coming into the US. So yeah, CBP can strip your entire car apart if they need to, because they will say, we don't know if he's carrying grapes or fentanyl. We have to, rip it all apart to make sure there's no bugs, there's no seeds that could impact the U.S. agricultural market.
So watch out, no fruit in plain view, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then just, be careful, now ever more so when you're traveling across the border and at airports. And feel free to reach out if you have specific questions. We're happy to answer them. We can certainly do some follow-up after this if anyone has any major burning issues or concerns, because we've heard about, naturalized citizens getting detained at the airport just here at SeaTac. I mean, there's been some scary stuff. So we want you to feel comfortable traveling, doing all this awesome stuff in the outdoors, and not be afraid to leave your home. That's the most important. Let's get out there.
That's
and exercise our right.
Yeah, Amy, Abtine, thank you so much. This was a terrific presentation. I know we covered a lot of ground tonight, and in an hour's time, none of us are going to become immigration experts, but I found this to be really informative. It sounds like others did as well. So thank you very much for that. If folks do have questions that didn't get answered or suggestions or ideas, feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact info is on the website. Drop me an email or give me a call. And just thanks to all of our leaders, especially for everything that you do to support the Mountaineers in our community. You are absolutely amazing. You're kind of the secret sauce of the Mountaineers, and we are just so grateful for everything that you do for our mission and for our community. Have a great evening, and we will share this recording as well as a blog post afterwards. And have a great night. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.